the last part we'll take up is the just guys, if you don't mind putting your phones on mute. The last thing we'll take up is we're going to get to this big debate among the Rishonim as to the specifics of what you can have for Seudah Mafsekes, and then we'll hit on briefly the notion of the whole concept of having the eggs, which I know everyone today knows with the ashes. That seems to be the prevalent custom today. So if anyone has any questions, just turn the mute and then just let me know. Otherwise, just picking up from the Gemara, just review last time. So you have a very bizarre debate in the Gemara, very, very bizarre, because what happens is that the question comes up. So what is the actual limitation of the Seudah? All right, and for now we're just going to stick to the Seudah part. So the first shita holds that a person can't have two tafshilin, and he can't have a meat or wine. And the main thing we'll focus on, obviously, is the two cooked dishes. A person can't have two cooked dishes. But Shimon ben Gamliel comes along and says, no, he says you just have to make a change. And so what's the change mean? So Rav Yehuda extrapolates and says the change is really that, for instance, if a person usually eats two cooked dishes, he should eat one. If a person usually has a meal with 10, he should have a meal with 5. If a person usually drinks 10 cups, he should have 5 cups. So the question that comes up is what a strange debate, because first of all, normally speaking in halacha, we don't like putting things in people's hands. Chazal were very sensitive insofar as creating a system where there's a lot of room for the expression for the individual. I know it's a very weighty, a heavy statement to make, and it's certainly a subject of a hashkafic discussion. But if you look at the way halacha is set up in a way where as I've told some of the Baal Batim, one of my adult shiurim, the halachic system was not set up for you; it was set up for man. So there's a certain universality to it. So we tend to like objective measurements. For instance, on Erev Tisha B'Av, you can't have two cooked dishes. But Rav Shimon ben Gamliel comes along and says, no. He says, really, it's a completely subjective idea. That if a person usually has, a meal with 35 people, or whatever, 40 people, whatever it is, he has to minimize it. And that's his theme. The theme is minimization. But it's a very subjective thing. So for those of us in this year right now, for me, it could be, I enjoy having 6 dishes of pasta, so I'll have 5. And for someone else, it could be having 1 dish of pasta instead of 2. So what kind of thing is that? And what pushes Rabban Shimon Gamliel into this type of position? And that's really the question. That's the first thing I want to take care of right now. How do we define this machlokas? You can't just to be clear. It's not simply an issue of objective subjective. I mean, there's something tempting about going in that direction to say, well, one side holds as an objective shear, a measurement, and the other side holds as subjective. But it's true that's what's going on. But we got to get into more the mindset. In other words, what's driving the position, especially Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Why does he have to say that it's purely subjective? And again, we don't like subjective things. We try to avoid subjectivity in halacha. So the floor is open for anyone who'd like to present a possibility. Or not. Nobody. Anyone? Possibility? Answer? It's too quiet. Yeah. What do you know already? You're prepared, aren't you? I have to give you some saras. Okay, I won't disagree with you, but I think you can go further than that. But of course, I have to, don't kill me for this, Avi. But I have to. There is a fact I think that if you know about will help clarify what's driving them. But then again, I didn't hide this fact. This fact was there all along. It just I think it fits into what we were saying last week. What's the source? I mean, I'll ask this question. What's the source for, and we established this last week, what's the source for having this change in the Seudah Mafsekes? And it was normally Seudah Mafsekes, so like by Erev Yom Kippur, a guy should have whatever the hell he wants. He should eat to his heart's content. All right. And in fact, there's a mitzvah like that. So what is it about Erev Tisha B'Av that makes it different? Right. So what do we say? Right. So we said the source of it comes from Avelis. Okay. Now, if you understand that the source of it comes from Avelis, and that what Chazal set up, which I think we established last time, was kind of a reverse Avelis. Normally, by Avelis, what happens is that the most serious period of time is day one, and that's actually me according to most shitas. It's from the Torah, and then as the days proceed, it becomes less and less restrictive. Like we said, from 1 to 3, and then 3 to 7, and then from 7 to 30, and you expressed halachically that you're slowly transitioning out of Avelis. Whereas by Tisha B'Av, it's the opposite. Tisha B'Av, especially if you're Ashkenaz, you're from 3 weeks to 9 days, and then they slipped into this period of time of Erev Tisha B'Av, this from Chatzos and beyond, a unique period of time where there's even more Avelis, and that's expressed through the actual Seudah itself. Okay, and that's why. And so the source of the limitations, any limitations that would exist in the Seudah, are sourced in Avelis. Okay. Now, if that's the case, all right, and here's I think where the move's going to lie in. Okay, it's an interesting thing. If you look at Hilchos Avelis, you'll notice something very interesting. In Hilchos Avelis, is there any restriction for the Avel? Not an Onain, not for the person who the Karov, the relative, passed away and is not buried yet. But when you're actually in the state of mourning itself, is there any restriction for what someone mourning can eat? I come on. I would assume by the tone of my question, it would be a giveaway. But correct. There actually is no restriction. Even meat and wine, according to the Rambam. Later Achronim are a little more machmir on it, but even something like meat and wine, there actually is no restriction in the meal. But let's put that aside. Let's just stick with Shnei Tavshilin. Certainly, what? You mean if you're right? But Sheva Brachos is the flip side of Avelis. Right. No, I mean, other than let's say like Pesach with chametz. No, I mean the restrictions don't really exist. But what? There's no idea of a Seudah on Hanukkah. I mean, you can have a meal, but there's no idea of having. There's no chiyuv. The Gemara does mention that that's a way to celebrate, but there's no chiyuv. There's no Seudas mitzvah by Hanukkah. So what I'm saying. So what I think if with that being the case, I think you can see what's bothering both the first Shita and Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, because things like this. In other words, you see, Chazal came along, and the first thing they did is they created this unique period of Avelis time from Chatzos until the fast starts. Okay, in other words, it's the last transition until it finally become like a true Avel. And remember, by the way, the Avelis of Tisha B'Av is really like the Avelis of the first day. That's why there's no tefillin in the morning. In other words, it's all about transitioning. Also, by the way, that's why you have the idea of the 10th of Av, the notion that it was still burning. But that idea is also, the precedent for that is really based on Avelis, which is that we don't just jump out of Avelis. By the way, also, you see that by, I think whoever mentioned Sheva Brachos before, one of the ideas of Sheva Brachos is also about Simcha. Simcha requires a transition. It's not simply, you don't go from the greatness of the happy experience of the wedding and just simply leave. Rather, there's a transition, and you see it also by Isru Chag. The whole idea of Isru Chag is really a notion that a person doesn't just jump from one emotional state to another. He needs a period of transition. So I would argue that Chazal here also, in this period of time, through the Seudah, are setting up this final transition until you become a true Avel. Okay, but there's one problem though. The problem is that since they're using Avelis, the notion or the concept of Avelis is really the consideration, right? There's only one problem, which is that conceptually it makes a lot of sense to use Avelis. But in the halachic system, when you look to the system of Avelis, there is no precedent that exists of a restriction of food. It doesn't exist. Okay? There's no idea like that. In other words, that's the chiddush of Chazal here. The chiddush isn't so much insofar as just creating the period of time, but rather what it is that they're saying in this period of time we're going to create a special restriction in what you consume at this meal. Okay, that's what their objective is. The objective of the Chachamim here is to create a in the parameters of mourning a restriction in your eating. So that's what they need to do. So that, I think that's the basis for, I think Avi, like we were saying before, whether it's going to be in the meal or in the Gavra. But that's the categorization, but the question is what led them down that road? What's pushing Rabban Shimon Gamliel to say that way? So I think the answer is like this. I think the answer is that according to the Chachamim, so the Chachamim say, okay, well, we're going to look at all the other areas in Avelis that exist, okay? And we see, like for instance, you can't wear leather shoes, and you have to sit on the ground, and what do you call it? The kriya, that you have to wear the torn garment. In other words, they look at the way that the Avelis is structured normally, and they see there's objective considerations. So they're going to apply the same objective considerations here. They're going to say, since objectivity is the rule of thumb by Avelis in every other area, we're going to apply the same objectivity to this Suda as well. So therefore, it's patterned along the same objective lines that exist in all other Hilchos Avelis. And that's why it's Shnei Tavshilin. In other words, they create a Shnei Tavshilin. There's no precedent whatsoever for two cooked dishes. But they didn't create the precedent of having an objective expression of Avelis. That exists already. So what they're saying is we're going to apply an objective expression of Avelis here as well. Okay, that's what's driving the first position, or the Chachamim. Okay, which is how we actually paskin. But I think I'll just make the point of Rav Shimon Gamliel, and then I'll take any questions. I think Rav Shimon Gamliel is saying that no, he's saying that you don't look at the categories, rather you look at the particular halacha. And since there's no precedent whatsoever that exists in the particular of Ochel by Avelis, in other words, when we look into the precedent, there's no such thing as a restriction in eating that exists by someone who's mourning. So therefore, since no precedent exists whatsoever, so now what are we going to do? We're going to model the halacha along the lines of each person. So in other words, like this. In other words, do you extend the idea of Ochel along the normative lines of Hilchos Avelis, or is there room to structure this specific halacha differently, since it would be more impactful on the Gavra, more so than a one-size-fits-all? And the reason why they can do that is precisely because no precedent exists in Avelis for such a type of restriction. That's the main idea I want to get across. Any comments? Feel free to rip it apart. Please. Shabbat is the day that we remember. We're zocher all tragedies that take place for the Jewish people. So the question now is, what model are they going to use in order to express this reality? So they turn to Avelis. They turn to mourning, because mourning is a precedent. See, I know a lot of people, it's funny, when I go recruiting, so a lot of times the question I get constantly from students is why should we trust the rabbis? They make things up. But the fact is, when you actually spend time studying Gemara, you see rabbis rarely, quote-unquote, make things up. Rather, they search for precedents. Before they institute a halacha, they search to see, what precedent can we turn to and use it as a guide. So here, there's the philosophy, but then there's the halachic expression. And the halachic expression, they use the system of mourning of Avelis as the method to express itself. And again, it's clear in the halachic system, the way we hold today, that's what they're modeling themselves after. So what I'm saying is that here, it's interesting, when they came up with, there's an idea, you must have a Seudas Mafsekes before Taanis. That idea exists. But now the thing is, they don't want you to indulge in some sort of great meal. They want it to fit into the theme and the mindset that a person's supposed to have as he enters into the Tisha B'Av experience to accomplish what you're suggesting, to have the right attitude towards Tisha B'Av. In other words, it would appear that Chazal would say that if a person I think the Ramban kind of alludes to that, but if a person indulged himself in this tremendous meal, right, he would be lacking insofar as the Avelis a person is supposed to feel as he enters into Tisha B'Av. Okay, but there's only so far that Chazal can go, right? The Chazal don't legislate perfection. Chazal try to create halachic categories for us to follow. So they're only going to go as far as to say that that we're going to go ahead and we're going to the Chazal are going to go ahead and say that we're going to structure a meal. The limitations are going to stem from the area of Avelis. Okay. So my point though is that that's what led them to this problem here, which is that what do we do? What do we do? Do we say that when we want to create a restrictive meal, there is no precedent of Avelis? They've used categories of Avelis and everything else, like the idea of what do you call it? Of for instance, according to, like certainly the Rav said so, the 3 weeks that is modeled after Yud Beis Chodesh. The restrictions that apply to Yud Beis Chodesh apply to the 3 weeks as well. And by the 9 days, it's even more serious. You can almost argue it's kind of like Shloshim. No shaving, limited bathing, no laundry. These are all ideas that exist already in Avelis. So they're just modeling it after that. But when you're going to run into a problem with this meal, what do you do about this meal? So that's why you have this bizarre machlokas. But I think it makes a lot of sense, because the question is, well, do we structure it like based on the other objective categories that exist already, or do we say no, that since there is no phenomenon of a restrictive meal that exists in Avelis, so therefore we're going to say that that when it comes to this meal, a person can do whatever he wants because there is no precedent. So therefore, as long as in his framework he goes ahead and makes a change, so then he's accomplished the objective. You know what I mean? I think that's the reason why such a subjective standard exists. So that's what I want to say by that first machlokas. Okay? Any other questions? I'll take that as a no. All right, because I want to get to the, I don't know what the right term is, but the meat of the matter here. I know, ironic, horrible joke, pun, terrible, kill me. Okay, so, yeah. Oh, right. Touche. Okay. Okay. So now things get really, really interesting here. If they aren't interesting already, because you get into this tremendous debate among the Rishonim insofar as what does Shnei Tafshilin mean. So before we look at Tosfos and we look at the Rush, I just want to get a sense of if I asked you when they say you can't have two Tafshilin, two cooked dishes, what would you guys think? What does that mean? What would you think two tafshilin means? Say it again. Roast and potatoes. Good. Okay. So what you're really saying is that two different foods that are cooked, right? Right, which is fine. There's no trick. This isn't a trick question. It's just I'm just curious insofar as what a person would think. Now, if there is actually a precedent for the notion of two tafshilin, I think I mentioned this last time, you have that by Pesach. So today, right, if you guys remember, the guys who were in my shir last year, we did this sugya, the whole sugya of the two cooked dishes, which today has become very normalized to be the shank bone and the egg. Which is cool. That's actually got a source in the Rishonim, but if you look at the Gemara itself, the Gemara says a guy has to bring out two cooked dishes, and Rav Haigon, when he comments over there, says that could be lentils and forget kidneys for a second, lentils and I don't know, whatever, something else. There's no reason to at its onset. There was really no idea in the Gaonim of specifically bringing in the shank bone and the egg. However, the Rishonim do mention, Rabbeinu Hanan is one of the earliest who alludes to it. But the point is that there is an idea of two tafshilin that exists in halacha. Here, okay, this is where things get really interesting. Here, when it comes to two cooked dishes, so we'll start with Tosfos, and then move to the Rush, who lists the other positions, and you'll see it's like all over the place. So our job's going to be to try to just these are very nice, concise, easy svaras to sort of get a sense of what's bothering the Rishonim. So Tosfos is Erev Tisha B'Av Lo Yochal Adam Shnei Tafshilin. It's on the top of Lamed Amud Aleph, the second Tosfos. So he says it is. He says Perish Shnei Tafshilin. So what does two Tafshilin mean? This is Rosalomar Bishtei Kderos. Okay. So what does two Tafshilin mean? So two Tafshilin means two, now we'll call these pots, for lack of a better term for the time being, or dishes, okay? Kegon, shekorin olam, achalnu shtei minim, shekorin mishuvan, or whatever that is. My old French is bad. So what does it mean? It means two kederos, okay? Which means that what the people say is that they've had two minim. Okay, so I want to just throw it out there. How would you translate those terms? What does he mean by achalnu shtei minim? So what would you say? Very good. Okay, good. That's a great example to use, by the way. Awesome. Okay, so you want to say that. Okay, good. So you would say that's 2 minim. You would say that the fish is 1 min and the egg's another min, right? Right. Okay. So we got to cheat ahead. So Tosfos is going to we can know what Tosfos is saying by moving ahead in him and then working backwards. So Tosfos says, "Ava ein les or lechol tafshil she'osem mi bitzalim umigvina umibeitzim." Okay. So, but we don't forbid to eat a cooked dish that has in it, okay, 3 things. Okay, onions, cheese, and eggs. Okay, onions. Yeah. Right, he said 2 pots. Okay, well you have to understand what he means though. You'll see what he means in a second, because this case here is going to show how you can have a multiple food dish, okay, but still be considered 1 min. That's the trick here. In other words, Tosfos is going to say that. What does a kedera mean? I think the best terminology is kind of like a come on, no, we don't eat a pot pie, but not with multiple things in it. In other words, you'll see. In other words, a food could exist where you have multiple foods in it, but yet is considered to be 1 tafshil. Okay, that's going to be the key by Tosfos. Well, no, it's not so pasha, because you'll see from the Rush, like you see the Rav Hai and the Ritz Gayas hold out, they would hold that's a problem, because you have different. Right, according to Tosfos right now, correct. According to Tosfos is taking the at the outset the more conceptual. Just at the outset, the more conceptual view of a tarovis. In other words, again, the guys in my share knows. I use this example all the time. Like when on Shabbos you have cholent. Now, what is cholent? Cholent is meat, hopefully meat, potatoes, beans, spices, etc. But you don't call it a meat, beans, potatoes, kishka dish. You call it cholent. So halacha does like that. Halacha likes the concept of taking the various food substances that exist and then basically saying that they lose their identity and become, in a sense, abstracted. It becomes like cholent, right? That's what we call it. We call it cholent. Cholent's more of an abstraction of what's actually in the dish itself. But Tosfos is going to be very careful, because he doesn't say you could cook anything you want and that becomes basically like 1 tafshil. He's very careful, because he says, and that's what this case is. He says this case would be fine, where you have onions, cheese, and eggs. Okay, now, as we'll see, why? So basically he says, so even though people don't eat onions raw, now, this is not for discussion for now, but because this is a big issue in the more of the left-wing Orthodox world, the question of eating onions raw. So Chazal felt that you should never eat an onion raw, because what will happen is that it can really be harmful for you. But let's keep something in mind. Okay, like Tosfos then says, "Shekashin l'chol gufo shel adam." Okay, so it's a very harmful thing to eat. But let's be careful. That doesn't mean you don't make a bracha on it. Okay, that's going to become a very critical part of the svara. You make a bracha on an onion. Okay, even though onions aren't normally eaten, and in many ways, I guess if you consume it, they thought that it could be very harmful to a person. But it's not a poison. If it were a poison, you wouldn't make a bracha on it. Okay, so you do make a bracha on onions. So keep that in mind. Okay, so he says, afal pichein. So even though when you eat it raw, in other words, it's harmful. Me'achar she'ein osem hen tafshil ba'atzmo im lo yasimu o shumanu shum davar shenoseh behem tam eino kari tafshil. Okay, kedei les or habeitzim shemasimin imam. So he says this. He says, so what's an onion? I mean, it's very simple what he's saying, what the onion is. What's the onion doing? Now, let's take the cholent example. When you put an onion in cholent, what's the onion doing? All right, you don't look at the onion. It's not just that the onion gets subsumed and its identity gets subsumed under the greater thing. What's the function of the onion? What's the onion doing? There's no trick here. Taste, right? It's giving taste. It's like a spice. It's giving taste to the food. So he's saying, so since by the onion, in the case of the egg dish, so now you see where Tosfos is going. The egg is the essence of the dish here. So since the onion's really coming along and giving taste, that's its function. So therefore, we're not going to treat the onion as a separate tafshil. Okay, but there's a havamina here. There's an assumption that you would treat an onion as a separate as a separate cooked item. So the first question we're going to have to answer is, you would think that an onion should be considered a separate food, kamash malan, that it's not, because its function is to be nosin tam. Okay? That's the first thing we're going to have to define. Now, what about cheese? Okay, what about cheese? So he says, by cheese, he says, what? Oh, well, one second, more than that. He says this. He says, there's no chashash by cheese. Why? So he says, because cheese that's cooked in a kedera, ein chashash alechol dechol davar shu nechal kamo shu chai, kamo chala, kamo gvina, kamo tapuchim, ein bahem toras bishul klal uklal. So he says, very simple. He says, cheese can be eaten raw, right? So since cheese can be eaten raw, so by cooking it, okay, you're not really subjecting the cheese to any type of change, right? I'm just saying factually. So therefore, cheese is not considered a tafshil. Okay? So again, we also have a hamim maskana here. Tosfos said you would think that cheese is considered a cooked thing. I mean, I'm cooking it. I put that cheese in with the egg and the onion. I'm cooking that cheese, right? But he says no, kamash malan, that since it could be eaten raw, it's not considered to be. It doesn't rise to the standard of being a cooked dish. Okay. So the two things we have to answer in Tosfos, the main things you have to answer is, one, why would you think that an onion is a tafshil kamash malan that's not a tafshil? And the second question is, why would you think that cheese is really considered a tafshil? And since it could be eaten raw, it's not considered a tafshil. Okay, that's the first thing we're going to have to take care of. But just to get all the facts out on the table, so I don't get accused of hiding anything. So if you take a look at the Rush, okay, the Rush says like this. The Rush says, it's source number 7 on those sheets. He says, Kasav Rav Haigon, Shnei Tavshilin She'amru. Okay, so, and this is very consistent with what he says by Pesach. Rav Haigon says, 2 cooked dishes means what? It means, for instance, rice and lentils. Shehain Shnei Minim. So Rav Haigon takes the simplest approach. He says, what does 2 tafshila mean? It means 2 species, right? So 2 different foods. So I think whoever brought the example before about the fish and the egg, those are 2 different minim. So therefore, if I cooked both of them in one pot, right, I can only have one of them. You would probably argue that you can assume that according to Rav Haigon, he probably would say the same thing by onions and cheese as well. He doesn't really qualify his position. I can't prove that, but you can argue that Rav Haigon is the most machmir position that you can imagine. I'm sorry, actually, the Ritz Gaius is. I apologize, but Rav Haigon is pretty machmir because he holds 2 minim means 2 different foods. Okay, so we have to define him. Then you have another one. The Ritz Gaius says kol shnei tavshilin. Okay, hein derech kavod. It's interesting. He brings in a little concept there that the notion of restricting the cooked foods, the 2 cooked foods, is really an idea of kavod. The Ramban says something similar. He says it's chashivas, it's importance. She says ve'asru chachamim afilu mimin echad shel kitnius. Okay, o min shel yerek. Ve'in tzarach lomer shnei minim. This is unbelievable. So according to the Ritz Gaius goes even further. He holds that what does the shnei tafshilin restriction mean? And this is the most machmir position you could take. He will hold, for example, let's say I make a pot of brown and white rice. Okay? I make both. Now they're both rice, okay, but according to him, he holds that no. He holds that even though there's brown rice and white rice, but the fact is that that's still considered 2 minim. Okay? That's still considered 2 minim. So we have to explain that as well. There's Rav Haigon and the Ritz Gaius arguing, does 2 minim actually mean 2 different foods, like rice and lentils, or could you actually have an expression of 2 minim even in the same species of food? It's just like there's an accidental difference between them. There's brown and white rice. I mean, I don't want to offend anyone who likes rice, but there's not, I mean, I guess one is healthier, but overall there's really nothing substantially different about white rice and brown rice. They're both rice, certainly from the genus standpoint. Yeah. Moving along. So now, then the Rush goes on. He says he says in France they're a makel, right, to give various amounts of minim in one kedera. Okay. So on the other end of the spectrum, you have an idea where whatever you can fit into that pot, right, whatever you can put into that pot is considered one tafshil. Okay. So that would mean that according to this position on Erev Tisha B'Av, knock yourself out. You can go ahead and fill in to that pot whatever you can stuff in there. Okay, so that's the other end of the spectrum. Then he says, Uva Ashkenaz Machmirin, fine. And then he says, and then comes the second part, which I'll just read outside. But basically, he wants to say, mentions the issue of cheese, okay? And he says cheese really shouldn't be a problem because it could be eaten raw. But turns out the Ravid argues on that. And the Ravid argues that cheese is considered a tafshil, is considered a cooked dish, even though it can be eaten raw. So, I don't want to be too confusing here, but whatever Tosfos' Havamina by cheese is, will be the Ravid's position, okay? Just want to get that clear. And then finally, just to read the last important part, which I know people want to know, this is V'nogu be'Ashkenaz. So the Rush brings down, so we're going back long time. V'nogu be'Ashkenaz lechol beitza k'moshe nogu b'Seudas havra. Okay, so it's an amazing thing. So, and this is just proving the point I was saying before. So, Seudas havra, what's Seudas havra? So Seudas havra is the first Seuda the Avel has after the burial is completed. Okay, and the halacha is that people are supposed to cook the meal for him. Because the Avel's not supposed to cook for himself. So there's a very old minhag that eggs were brought in. I've done some research on this, and there's various reasons given why, but we're not going to get into all the reasons. But the point is, egg is considered like the food for the Avel. So what they would do is in Ashkenaz they would serve eggs at the Seudas Havra. So since at that meal, and now you're seeing, by the way, again, you see beautifully how what Chazal did is they reversed Avelis, right? So the last meal you have before you go to become an Avel is the Seudas Havra. It's like you're walking backwards as an Avel. So the Seudah Mafsekes in some ways, according to this way of learning, mimics the Seudas Havra. But I don't want to go, it's so far you can go with that. Okay? Fine. So the question is, so how do we define all this stuff? Okay, and let me just review everything so we're all on the same page. Okay, Tosos wants to say that you can have. It seems like he wants to say you can have multiple foods inside the. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Let's go in order from Makel to Machmir. I think it's a better way to approach it. The most Makel position holds I can put in whatever I want to into this tafshil, into this pot. Okay, and I can put in you name it. If it goes into that one pot, right? That I'm mutter to have that for my Seudah Mafsekes. I just can't have two pots of food. Tosos comes along and creates a limitation. Tosos says, no, I can have multiple foods on one condition. If it's an onion, we'll universalize that and call it, let's say, something that gives it tam. If it's an onion, so then that's fine, because it's not considered to be a tafshil. We have to explain why. And if I have cheese in there, it's also not considered a tafshil, because it can be eaten raw. We have to explain that position as well. Then you go to Rav Haigon, the Ravid says that the Havamina by Gvina, that he holds to the Havamina. He says that cheese would still be a problem. Then you move along to Rav Haigon on the spectrum. Rav Haigon holds that shtei minim, which means that I can't have, let's say, rice and lentils. And then the Ritz Geyas holds that even within the min itself, there's a restriction. I can't have two, let's say, sub-minim. I can't have brown rice and white rice. I can only have one of the two. Okay? So that is answer the Havamina by Tosos by Gvino, you'll answer the Ravid. So what do you guys say? So this is a very nice. What I like about this is very limited, simple categories insofar as how the Rishonim are taking this up. So what do you say? And feel free to start with whatever you like. The floor is open. I've been talking for quite a while. I'm sure people are asleep by now. So whatever you guys have to offer, let's take it away. Start with whoever you like. Where did he live? Somewhere in the Middle East. Yeah. But you can't. But that's not. But you got to be. If I remember correctly, yes. Correct. And the Ritz Geyas included. The Ravid is France also. No. Doing partners. Tosos is saying like this, I think. What Tosos is saying is that, let's take the onion case. So Tosos is saying is that his main point is like this. On the one hand, you've got two qualities to onion, okay? On the one hand, it's certainly a food because you make a brach on it. If it weren't a food at all, you're not going to make a brach on it, right? So it functions as a food. On the other hand, though, okay, what's its unique property? What he's saying is that when it is in the presence of other foods, okay, what happens to it? So it loses its identity as a food and becomes something that's a nosin tam. Okay, so Tosfos is saying the havmina is that since it's considered a food, it is a food. So therefore, it's ol minyan, and therefore, it would be considered a tafshil. But kamash malan, since it's functioning as a tam, okay, and this is, I think, what you mean, Avi. In other words, in bitoras chashivas, which is what we're looking for here. We're looking at important food. It's not just simply foods, but it's a certain chashivas, a certain importance or kavod that emerges through the cooking process. Since this food, when it's in the presence of other foods, functions only as a nosein tam, so it lacks the chashivas of tafshil. That doesn't mean it's not a cooked food, but insofar as the chashivas of tafshil is concerned by the Seudas Mafsekes or Erev Tisha B'Av, it's not something that that counts towards the tafshil. And he's going to say a similar thing by the cheese. Why? Because And remember this for next year in the Kira stuff, okay? So you have to understand, what does cooking do, okay? What cooking does is, cooking in its most base halakhic form, cooking means that you're rendering this food to become edible, okay? That's in its most basic form. For instance, the case you're always going to come across of Kira is going to be raw meat. Raw meat is not edible. What does cooking do? It renders this food edible, okay? By the cheese, okay, there's no question if I'm cooking it, it's an improvement, right? Because I notice when I have pizza, I don't want to have raw cheese on my pizza. I want to have cooked cheese. But it's simply an improvement. So Tosfos' other point is that an improvement in a food through bishul does not make that into a tafshil. It has to be where it's actually rendered to become edible, right? So it's only when bishul makes the food edible, at that point is it defined as a tafshil that registers for the Seudas Mafsekes of Erev Tisha B'Av. So that's what I think Tosfos is saying. Okay? In other words, they are related because they're both trying to express the chashivas of a tafshil, a chash of tafshil, where the restriction applies by Erev Tisha B'Av, right? The question is, there's two types of foods. One is an onion, where in the presence of other food, it functions as nosein time, so therefore it lacks chashivas. And by the cheese, since cooking only improves it, rather than makes it into something edible, right? It's kind of a lesser degree of improvement, so that's why it also doesn't register as a chash of tafshil. Okay? Is that clear? So then that leaves us with basically, and so the Raavad would hold that, no, the Raavad would hold that improvement per se is the problem. So even though it's true it's not making it edible, because the cheese is edible beforehand, but it doesn't matter if I'm cooking it. What does cooking mean? Cooking means that I want to improve this food. So if cooking functions to improve the food, then the food itself rises to the level of a tafshil, and therefore the restriction would kick in. Okay? So that leaves us... Correct. Exactly. I wanted this thing melted, so that makes it better. And that just leaves us to Rav Hai and the Ritz Gaius, which I think are easy. Okay, Rav Hai holds it's a 2 minim. Ritz Gaius holds it's even in 1 min. So what does he say? What's the machlokas there? I think this is how you would categorize it. You put Rav Hai and the Ritz Gaius kind of like in their own position. So what would you say? Rav Hai let's just give it. Okay, Rav Hai holds it's a din in the substance itself, right? And, Rav Hai is going to hold that it can't be more than one type of food. Okay, so that's a din in the substance, right? So fish and rice are 2 different substances. That's it, done. But according to the Ritz Gaius, what does he say? He says, no, what makes it 2 foods? It has to be nicker in the food itself. It's not the reality of the food, but rather is it nicker. So if I have brown and white rice, it's true that they're really, from a substance standpoint, the same food. I mean, you're talking about a color difference. But insofar as being nicker is concerned, I see 2 different foods, even though in reality they're the same food. Okay? So that's why I think the Ritz Gaius would hold, if it came to 2 kinds of white rice, I don't think you'd have a problem with that. I think you only has a problem when it's nicker that it's 2 minim. So I think that's the machlokas Rav Hai and the Ritz Gaius. Yeah. Any questions? Because that's the basic, that's the substance of everything. See, now I just want to make one point. The idea of having eggs, okay, that concept, and the guys who were in my Pesach shir last year will remember this. There is an idea of the food itself functioning as a vehicle to bring about certain concepts. Okay, in fact, that's the reason why the notion of the way the Rambam has 2 tafshilin by Pesach. He says you should have 2 pieces of meat. And if not, you can use other types of tafshil. Why? Because the pieces of meat will remind you of the 2 korbanos, right? And that's kind of what led into the whole notion of having the shank bone of the egg. because I'm not now the egg's a whole separate question why, but the notion is that the foods themselves function as vehicles to bring about a certain idea. So I think the minhag Ashkenaz that came about to have eggs it's very similar to what happened by Pesach, which is that okay, well, it's true, halachically speaking, a guy can have what he wants, okay? But the idea of the egg is really one where it can function as a vehicle to bring about a certain idea. So there's certainly, I would never be opposed to if someone said, should they have eggs for Seudas Mafsekes, that'd be a good idea. Or at least make it, right? But you gotta be careful. But this is the tricky part, because once it becomes your Seudas Mafsekes is your egg, that's it. So what I would not be a big fan, I'm not sure if you should go down the road. See, here's a problem. In other words, they don't want a certain chashivas to be expressed in the meal. They don't want it to be an important meal. But they never say you should limit the quantity of food you should consume. In other words, a Seudas Mafsekes means I fill up on food before the Taanis, so that I know I won't be hungry, and I won't have to think about hunger the entire time, and I'll be able to focus on tshuva, right? But at the same time, the restriction here is more insofar as the chashivas of the meal, not in the quantity. Okay, so the question that comes up by the egg is that, okay, well, if a guy has like one egg as a Seudas Mafsekes with, like, let's say ashes, so it's very nice, he'll get the idea of the Seudah a little better, but I'm not sure if that's like such a great thing to do insofar as filling up is concerned. You know what I mean? So I know the common practice today is to have like a big meal and then to have your egg, right? So I'm not sure. I mean, if you look at, I'm looking at the Shulchan Aruch right now. The Shulchan Aruch, he doesn't have something like that. He has like this. He says, Erev Tisha B'Av lo yochal adam Seudas Mafsekes she'ochel achar chatzos basar v'lo yisha yayin v'lo yochal shnei tafshilin. So immediately he says your meal should be one lacking simcha and lacking chashivas. Okay, and then in Sif Beis it mentions basar maluach, fine, and then he says in Sif Gimel afilu bishal min echad, right? Even if it's one min in two different gederos, that's considered two tashilin, and therefore you should be machmir and even to have 2 min in one gedera. Etc., etc. Okay, and then even by not davar huchai. Okay, and then he says but you could have. He says mutar lechol peiros kashem chayim afilu kamina. But you could have apples and oranges and bananas. There's nothing wrong with that. But then he brings in nohagim lechol adashim and beitzim v'shalom b'socham shehem machal avelim. So this is he does introduce in Sefei. He says the minhag is to eat lentils with eggs cooked in them. All right, because that's considered the food of the avel. Okay, and the Ramah brings down v'yesh noagim lechol beitzim kashim shu ganki machal avelim. So the minhag is to eat eggs that are hard-boiled eggs. Okay, and then finally the Shulchan Aruch climaxes, so to speak, with misha efshalo lo yochal b'Seudas Mafsekes el pas chareva v'melach v'gidon shamayim. If you guys remember, that is the Rambam. The Rambam says the Chasidim Rishonim would only have this, like, crusty piece of bread and a little bit of water. So he brings that down actually as like a more of a halachic thing. Misha efshalo, if you could do this is what you should do. Which is fascinating. So the Shulchan Aruch goes through like a sort of an evolution in the halacha. He goes first from the normative halacha to the idea of having your Seudah should be one of machal avelim to culminating in it. Ideally, if a person could just have some bread and water, so that's like the greatest expression of avelis in the situation, because the idea is he's so overcome by sadness, all he'd want to consume is that amount. So if you want to be like on the highest possible level, assuming you can do it, this is only if you can do it, that's what you should really do. You should have, I think I mentioned this last time, the Shulchan Aruch brings it down. When you have your Seudas Mafsekes, it's not a time for family. It's not a time for everybody to sit together. Zaymin halacha zimun. You should sit on your own, on the floor, and eat a minimal type of thing to bring about that state of avelis. But if you know that having just a pas chareva and a kiton shamayim won't be sufficient, so then you really should have, the next level would be the machale avelim, okay, which is really the what do you call it, the idea of the eggs, right? And you want to have it ashes, that's fine. But that's your Seudah though, right? And then if that doesn't work, then you can the way that won't convey the idea of the veils, but you're certainly Yotze, is to have one tafshil. Is to have one tafshil. And the Shulchan Aruch says you should be machmir. You should really try and be as most like Rav Haigon as much as possible, and try to avoid Tosfos' position. So again, like this year, it comes out that that's not going to be an issue. But in general, it's a nice concept that, and I like that idea, which is where it's not enough just to say halachically you should have the meal, but in the meal itself, if there's some vehicle towards avelis, is according to Shulchan Aruch, it's certainly a kiyum in your Seudas Mafsekes. Okay, so that's basically the upshot insofar as how you paskin. And the Mishnah Berurah the Mishnah Berurah, doesn't really. I mean, he doesn't add much insofar as it's concerned, but he certainly says he endorses the notion of having the egg, if not, or the pas chareva, which is certainly a way we should go. Any questions? I'll take that as a no. All right, I hope that was clear. I guess Bezrat Hashem next year we'll have the Beis HaMikdash, so these issues won't be as important. And I hope that everybody has an easy fast. And just one quick word, I think it's important to understand as we get into Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is difficult for multiple reasons. It's very difficult for one reason why these are my personal reflections. One reason why it's difficult is because there's a lot of handcuffs on you as far as ability to learn Torah. It's clear from Chazal, you're not really supposed to engage in learning Torah on Tisha B'Av. Unfortunately, what's happened is certainly during the day, the keynotes are very important, but at the same time, unfortunately, most people have no idea what they're saying when they say the keynotes. So I find there are some shuls, which I think is a very nice minhag. They'll shorten the amount of keynotes, but they'll have like a small concept introduced by insofar as what the keynotes are about. But I urge you, rather than just mumble words in Hebrew that we have no idea what we're saying because it's very difficult poetry, pick out like 10 or 12 keynotes and try to get a sense of what the mood and what the concepts that are being delivered there, because they're very critical. And try your best to internalize the sadness. I mean, this is the saddest day of the year. It's a day where every tragedy, and Yehadus is defined by tragedy, that we're supposed to commemorate the tragedy, the tragic existence of Bnei Israel, since we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. And you have to think about that. And if it really brings it to home, it's important to spend time with your family discussing what it means for us as Bnei Israel to lack the Beis HaMikdash, to be in a state of exile, to live underneath sovereignty that we don't truly have, to really be in a state where we're so far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's important for us to reflect on that and to really do tshuva and Bezrat Hashem bring us to a point where we return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and we merit the Beis HaMikdash. So please try and make Tisha B'Av a memorable day, and so that really impacts you not just on that day but for the rest of your life. So I'll leave you with that, and have an easy day.